Well, if you went to bed early and shut that game off, you missed another great game. A great game the Pittsburgh Steelers lost. The Steelers lose to the Minnesota Vikings 36-28 on Thursday Night Football as the Steelers follow up the big comeback victory against the Ravens with a loss only a few days later. This is your Steelers postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now. Go to Steelers Now for the game recap and here on PSL and SN for the rest of your game coverage, including video reaction here from Tomlin and company here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm your host, Mike Asti, and I'm going to be joined by our Nick Farabaugh of Steelers Now to try to make some sense, try to discuss this game, try to unpack this game. We obviously have a lot to talk about here, from the Steelers' miserable start to gaping holes for Dalvin Cook to run through, to TJ Watt suffering an injury and not breaking James Harrison's single season sack record yet, to me having posts ready to go that yet to see the light of day, to the second half Steelers comeback, to Ben playing better in the second half, to finishing this game and losing in the last second on one final play. And of course, tons of Chase Claypool that was good, that was bad, and that was also really stupid all the way through the game as well. So, Nick, I'll start here. Obviously, we've seen this fish before. In fact, literally the last time you were on the postgame show, it was almost the identical story. Sunday Night Football against the Chargers, a miserable first half. They came back in the second half. We were discussing if it was an Eureka moment. It was not, and it wasn't enough in terms of the comeback effort. What changed from the first half to the second half? The defense had to play better. Ben had to play better. The offense had to play better. All of that did occur. They almost won. They didn't. But what was different from the first half and how bad it was to the second half and how much better it got?
They just played better football. I mean, it's literally that simple. Like, they communicated at a way better level.
Yeah.
The gaping holes were gone. I mean, they were in their gaps. That was the big thing. And then in terms of the offensive line missed, I think, 4 or 5 defenders that got Ben killed tonight, at least for sacks. And that didn't happen down the stretch. I mean, incredibly, actually, down the stretch, Ben was sitting in there for a long time, and it turned into explosive plays down the field for the offense. Right. Ben ended up actually having a really good third and fourth quarter, I think, because the offensive line picked it up. And then also, of course, the receivers started making a ton of plays, right? Because Washington had a few big plays. Deontay had a few big plays. McLeod had a few smart plays, and obviously Claypole had a few big plays too.
He did.
We'll talk about Claypole. Freiermuth had a few big plays. That there were. I can't even not mention Najee. Obviously, Najee kind of kickstarted the whole thing. So, that big, when you go back to that 3rd and 2 where Najee kind of broke the 2 tackles and got the 3-yard gain. I mean, that's kind of where it kickstarted everything, and then they went down and scored a touchdown on that drive.
Yeah.
I mean, they just played better fundamental football. They communicated better. They were on the same page. Again, it was far from perfect in the second half, but it did seem like they just played better football, communicating better. They were technically sound more. They just played as a team instead of playing as a band of individuals doing one person's job. And I think that's the thing that was more important. And I think that's what mostly changed. It didn't seem like there were, drastic adjustments or anything. I think they just played better. Maybe it was a motivational speech from Tomlin. I don't know what went down post game, but
yeah,
they just played better fundamental football. The techniques, the fundamentals you teach people of football, it showed up in the second half for the Steelers. When they played the fundamentals of football on both sides of the ball, they're a pretty good team, as we've seen over these second halves. The issue is they don't do it a ton, and when they don't do it a ton, you see their issues really not masked at all and just bear out to the world.
When you don't play a complete game, you can lose to anybody. You can lose to a mediocre team. You can tie the Detroit Lions. When you don't play a complete game, you're vulnerable to lose to anybody, and you cannot expect to come back and win consistently in the NFL against anyone when you dig yourself these kind of holes. And I totally get the short rest. I totally get this is still a banged up team. Joe Hayden could not return for this game, likely because of the short rest. We'll see what happens next week, but no excuses. As you mentioned, fundamental football. It was not there in the first half. It was there in the second half, but there's no excuse for it to not be there in the first half. It was a big game for the Steelers. It wasn't a conference game, but they needed to follow up the Ravens victory with another one. They're still fighting for their playoff lives, which shockingly are still legitimately there because the Browns have lost. The Bengals have lost several games recently, and the Ravens are a team that they already beat, and they will finish the year against the Browns on Monday Night Football and then the Ravens. So they're certainly still in the thick of things, but it's not in any way off of impressive football. The Steelers do lose to Minnesota, now 6-6-1. The Steelers 36-28 losers to Minnesota on this Thursday night football night. Nick Farabaugh, Mike Asti here on our Steelers postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now. Nick, what would you say is and this is an easy question, obviously. They weren't consistent. They weren't good in the first half, and that wasn't enough no matter what you did in the second. But just in general, if you're handing out pieces of the pie here, in terms of what is responsible for this loss, what to blame for this loss, is it the defense? Or is it maybe more the offensive line being so bad and allowing those gaping holes in the first half? Is there even a coaching decision you could point to? Because certainly on the broadcast, there were some that criticized the decision to go for two, the play call, then to go for two. We did see interception and a turnover right after that to give the Vikings eventually more momentum to feel more comfortable in the game. And if the Steelers kick the extra point, then they're only down one possession. I liked the call at first because I thought it was aggressive. I kind of almost been convinced to like it less after that, but certainly the play call I didn't like. But what would you say is the overlying theme to be responsible for this loss outside of just not playing well early?
Well, I blame the defense more than anything because you allow Dalvin Cook to run for over 150 yards in the first half, and Justin Jefferson's wide open. And to be quite honest with you, they were lucky they were only down 23-0 at half. They were lucky. Jefferson and Cousins didn't hook up on a few balls that they probably should have. And there probably should have been maybe 2 more touchdowns up on the board if they had. So the Steelers were pretty lucky to actually only allow 23 in that first half. I thought the defense was the main issue for most of this game. The rushing defense, it allowed Minnesota to control the entire ball control aspect of the game. The Steelers' offense obviously was a big issue. And number 2 right there with them is absolutely the offensive line. The offensive line got Ben killed. There were miscommunication issues where really all Minnesota had to do was show 2 blitzers in the A gap, and they kind of didn't know what to do. Kendrick Green had a disastrous night, I thought. Him and Ben seemed off. Even in the second half when things were going better, he and Ben were not on the same page whatsoever. I thought he was terrible tonight. I thought the offensive line was terrible. But the defense overall, you just can't get into 29-0 holes. And the offense, obviously holds blame too. You just can't not score for the first 2.5 quarters of the game either.
Right.
And it wasn't like the defense, hung them out to dry necessarily. I mean, the defense was bad, but the offense has to get some sustainable drive going, and they got nothing. I mean that. They got absolutely nothing going in the first half and in the beginning parts of the third quarter. So, I mean, it's a team effort, and both of them, I think, are at fault. The overall issues are just the same issues we've been talking about all year. Run defense, offensive line, like that's the 2 issues. And then the receivers as well, not playing well in that first half. Also,
would you say that the first half of this game was maybe the worst performance from the offensive line all year?
It's up there.
Because we had talked about recently as well on here and other shows we both are on, that the offensive line steadily had quietly been getting a little bit better to where you have to grade them on a curve. You expect them to be bad this year. They're young and inexperienced, but they had been getting a little bit better recently. And then all of a sudden, it was just disaster. I mean, I'm not even joking. You and I could have ran through some of those holes and got into the end zone. It's insane, the holes that they were allowing there in the first half. And Troy Aikman's the perfect color guy to have on that broadcast because he was quarterback over potentially the greatest offensive line in league history in the early 90s with the Cowboys. And he even made a comment that no slight against my boy Emmitt Smith, who set the rushing record, but his offensive line was so great that helped him get there. And I've never seen holes this big, even by my offensive line. It was just crazy. I
think there was a stat that said in the first half, they were averaging that the Vikings were averaging nearly 11 yards before contact on runs. I mean, that's absurd. 11 yards before contact. No one touched Cook and Madison before they even got a first down. That's how bad it was in the first half on the run defense aspect of things for the Steelers. And they got absolutely kicked in the trenches. Yeah. And as we talked about, the fundamental start of football, pretty much all football teams outside of the quarterback position, is the trenches. And the Steelers have gotten their butts kicked multiple times this year. The Chargers, the Bengals, this game. I think even the Raiders game you can go back to, they got beat pretty badly in the trenches in that game.
Yeah.
That's the first half, they got kicked in the trenches. It was simple as that. And it, again, when you get butt kicked in the trenches that bad and your secondary and your inside linebackers are clearly not good enough to pick you up in that way. And again, your quarterback, Ben, had a good performance, but Ben is not the guy that's going to elevate people anymore as well. His limitations with mobility also hurt this. So that's another thing. You just look, there's just not the pieces to bail out the offensive line or the defensive line. And when you get your butt kicked in the trenches with a team like this, everything kind of falls apart around it. And of course, when they go better in the second half, the team goes upwards because they won in the trenches in the second half. So
right.
It's really not hard.
Yeah, and you look at Ben's overall spread here, 28 for 40, 308 yards, 3 touchdowns, does have the 1 pick, sacked 5 times, but a quarterback rating of 107.1, ends up being a solid performance by the numbers for Ben, and certainly another game that, especially with given his age, and he's not been great this year by any means, he's been okay at times, but that's enough from him at this age in his career. You cannot really ask him to go out there and do what he did 10 years ago and make up for a porous O-line and run around all over the place and be elusive and throw for 400 yards and be incredibly efficient, etc. That's about as good as it's going to get for Ben at this point in his career, as it clearly is winding down. And based on the reports, this is it for Ben Roethlisberger, which probably is a positive to finally figure out the future of this franchise. But as we stand right now, you can't ask for much more. And he has those numbers with the O-line being so bad in the first half, where it actually looked like he was chirping back at Tomlin. It looked like we were about to see Ben retire in the middle of the game. It was so disastrous. I was about ready to get excited for a post-game press conference from them. But then it did correct itself, and the O-line got better and certainly helped things. Now, something we also got to discuss from this game, and you alluded to it earlier, and it ends up being Ben's leading receiver to this game, and a man that they would not have been able to come back if it was not for his success. 9 targets, 8 receptions, 93 yards, an average of 11.6 per, didn't get in the end zone, but had a nice 38-yarder there late in the game that certainly helped them, but also boneheaded plays early, celebration way too long late that end up hurting the team, immaturity all throughout the game despite obvious ability that's there from Chase Claypool. It's been a little bit of a down year comparison to last year, and this goes from even the offseason of weird comments and talking about, I'm not worried about the Browns, they're going to get clapped by the Chiefs. Well, this Steelers team's been getting clapped in different halves and different games, so maybe that's a concern as well. What are your thoughts on Chase Claypool overall, in terms of he played well by the numbers in this game, but there's going to be moments that people, our colleagues are just going to focus in on and just kill this guy all week, and it's going to be hard to defend him. I mean, he's a young player, but just boneheaded plays, got to be a talking to, I'd imagine, from Tomlin or Ben or somebody at the end of this to say, hey, on the plane ride home, we got to get this figured out.
Yeah, many people have made the comment before, but Chase Claypool is who people think Juju is. Like that's who Chase Claypool is. Right. Because Juju, for what he does, it's off the field. He doesn't actually hurt the team on the field with anything like this. Right. He's Juju's a very cerebral, smart player on the football field.
Let's give credit. Alan Saunders said that to us actually in our group text. Exact point. Yeah.
So like he said that, and then I've seen multiple people say it just on Twitter too. Like it's a common thought. And listen, Chase Claypool is a guy that obviously is so talented. I mean, he's 6'4". He runs a 4.42. He can make amazing grabs. You saw 2 really just unbelievable plays by him, I think, down the stretch. The first for a first down where he kind of just mossed the defender, and then obviously the DPI, but he caught that ball. I don't know how he caught that.
Yeah.
But you cannot, and I mean this, you cannot celebrate when the time clock is an issue. I don't know what in the world he's doing. He cost him at least 5 seconds. Cost him at least 5 seconds. And when you talk about that, that's a play. I mean, that's a whole play that they could have ran. They could have ran another play, and Claypool blew it. And that's the thing. Claypool then got reprimanded by guys next to him, and he's mad at them on the screen too. He's mad at them. Like, that's the thing that gets you. And let's, the early part of the game too. I mean, let's talk about it, because this guy.
Yeah. Oh, it's there too. It's a whole game.
So on third down, he misses the block, causing the drive to get completely blown up on a 3rd-and-1 run for Najee.
Sure.
He fumbles the ball. I mean, it's 2nd and 3, and it's going to be 3rd and 1, and you stretch the ball out. Luckily, it was overturned, so it didn't matter in that regard. But that's another one where you're like, what the heck is this guy doing? Like, that's just bad situational football from him. It's like, dude, is Claypool even aware of what he's doing out here? He's just playing he's just out there kind of playing. And that's the thing about Claypool.
Just pure athletic ability, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing, of course, is the taunting penalty earlier in the game. So he got the taunting penalty. He celebrates when the time clock is going down. He blows a block, and he's got that dumbheaded fumble that wasn't a fumble. Luckily, they're lucky it wasn't a fumble. Claypool is a guy, though, that you live with his lows because of his highs, right? Because, again, as you said, they are not in this game without him. Like, he was.
Yeah, but here's the annoyance, and I totally agree. But you've detailed 4 examples of boneheaded plays. Okay, he had 4 big plays in this game as well. And I'm not saying they cancel each other out, because sometimes the big plays are bigger than the boneheaded plays, but sometimes the boneheaded plays are bigger than the big plays. I feel like, wow, obviously, when production is there, you're gonna stay the course. But, and I'm not saying it's a locker room issue either. This isn't Terrell Owens here, but something has to also give. I feel like, knowing the Steelers like we do, knowing Tomlin, knowing this franchise, knowing what they've dealt with before, and the concern of maturity that they could be wondering about for the future, especially when he's not liking being told. He seems like he doesn't enjoy authority, or doesn't like a leadership telling him something. That's just guessing too, but based on kind of what we've seen from this game, just a lot of bad signs. And I feel like it's almost one thing if somebody needs to improve about some ability on the field, but to have boneheaded immaturity be your kryptonite, it's almost more annoying and really disappointing. It just has to be corrected, or it can't be a long-term career on the Steelers, or they're just never going to put up with this long-term.
That's the thing with Chase, is that he's such a talented football player that, I mean, they're better when he's playing. Like, he offers them things that no one else on the roster can, even when they're all healthy.
Yeah.
And he's in his
doesn't
second
have to
year.
be this way, though. Doesn't have to be this
it doesn't.
way.
but the thing is, if Claypool was a veteran, and he's not, he's a second-year guy. If he was a vet, you would probably just get rid of him at this point. But he's a second-year guy.
He's young.
So if you're Tomlin, you're hoping, okay, this guy's young. He'll grow up. And sometimes there are these guys that are boneheaded when they're young, and they turn out to be the best leaders in the locker room when they're 30. And it can happen to Chase. I mean, it's not like he's not a guy that you're just like, oh, this guy is done and you're going to cut him next year. Like, this is a guy that can learn still. But my worry is they benched him for a series today, then brought him back on, and he still celebrated late in the game.
So I'm saying he didn't learn anything, and then he gets annoyed when they're telling him, hey, you're not learning, like, get your head in the game late. He's going at his teammates. I would think we're getting close to a scenario too, if not it already happening, where a veteran who doesn't put up with anything, whether he's on the offensive side or the defensive side, and Cam Hayward, somebody like that's going to go, hey, I don't care if it's 15 catches for 400 yards. You're not going to show up us on the sideline. You're not going to celebrate the. They're just certain guys there that are still fed up with certain ability. You know who he reminds me of, honestly, in terms of pro sports? And this is a veteran, not a second-year guy. So a second-year guy, the only thing I can think of right away in terms of a second-year receiver on the Steelers, this is years ago, Plexico Burress was like this early in his career. He then, of course, became a much better player. Some immaturity still was there with literally shooting himself in the leg, but certainly caught a Super Bowl game winner as well for the Giants. So he picked himself up in terms of maturity and got to be a better player. And right now in pro sports, Chase Claypool is like the Russell Westbrook of the NFL. He doesn't seem to have the football smarts or the basketball smarts. He's an incredible athlete, and he just goes out there, and you're going to have greatness, and you're going to have some really boneheaded plays, and you're going to put up with it because the greatness generally outweighs the boneheadedness, and it's a possibility every time he's there, but you're going to scratch your head and be really annoyed as well.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And Claypool's a guy that should know better too,
Right.
I mean, like it's not like he's coming out here and he's just, a guy that has come from, really a program without tradition. Like he's coming from Notre Dame, Notre Dame. Like this is a guy that should know better. And he does know. And, in the way he talks in his press conference, you can tell he knows better. He says usually the right thing, aside from like the music comment and all that stuff. But that stuff,
he's a smart guy, even if the football's smart.
No, he's a smart person that should know better in these situations. That's the thing. And he comes from a really good university. He comes from a really good locker room that has guys like Cam, guys like Juju, guys like Minka, guys like that are model examples of how football players should be. But Chase, as good as he is, you have to I'm telling you, he's a second-year guy, so you have to ride through this and hope he learns from it. But if we're getting into, year 3 now next year, and we'll see if this persists, if this is the thing that persists through year 3, you're starting to get into territory where, okay, this is not going to be fixed. This is who this guy is, and is it time to cut bait? But that's a discussion for another day. Right now, you just have to live with it because, again, who are you going to turn to? Cody White? No, you're not turning to Cody White. James Washington, for what he did tonight, I thought he did really good, but this was really his first game where he actually showed out this year. So this was a first for Washington in a while that he's actually stepped up. So it's really you're not going to get Claypool's impact from anyone but Claypool, especially with Juju hurt. So they're going to have to live with it. They're going to have to see if he can learn through it. Tomlin's going to have to work through it with him, and it's going to have to be what it is, and we'll see if it improves because, man, they need Chase Claypool to be here and be a significant piece of their future.
The Steelers are invested in Chase Claypool. He is very, very young. It is year 2, and maybe his expectations were so high in being so good in terms of it being record-setting for several weeks in a row in his rookie year. You do have more pressure now without Juju there. And again, the Steelers wouldn't have been in this game at all without Claypool, because as much as Deontay Johnson is the number 1 receiver, he's emerged the number 1 receiver. That's just case closed. He is the number 1 guy. Chase Claypool has the number 1 numbers in this game. Chase Claypool, 8 catches, 93 yards, 11.6. Deontay, 5 for 76, 15.2. James Washington, 4 for 65 with the touchdown. Then McLeod Freiermuth, who we'll get to in a second, with a score 2 for 32, which maybe would have been more, and maybe another score there at the end, which we'll talk about here in a minute as well. Nick Farabaugh here joining me on our Steelers post-game show. The Steelers lose 36-28. Their comeback effort once again falls short. Death taxes, and the Steelers just cannot play a complete game. And once again, it bit them in the you-know-where. The Steelers now 6-1, and just hoping for disaster again from the AFC North on Sunday, which is an unfortunate thing to have to hope for if you're a Steelers fan, a member of Steelers media, or a player on this team. But that's just the case here when you're following, covering, or being around the Steelers team right now, thinking maybe something else could occur. But they're not out of it, but it's not good. It's not a good feeling right now, and just god-awful football in the first half. They did turn it on in the second, but that's just not an acceptable way to play. What I do want to ask you, because this is also going to be talked about a lot, and I do see a lot of comments about this in the chat in addition to the Claypool conversation, Pat Freiermuth had a touchdown earlier, has emerged as a security blanket for Ben. Ben liked him in camp. We're seeing that throughout the season. Ebron being hurt. Freiermuth is the guy at the tight end position, like Claypool. He's someone they're invested in. He's the future as well as this franchise, with or without Ben there. But at the end of the game, Freiermuth had what was really the only ball that could have been thrown, kind of a perfect ball from Ben, maybe one of his better balls in the game, threading the needle. It was granted between several defenders, but did get it in his direction. Freiermuth couldn't haul it in. They do lose. Last play does not end up being successful. They don't get in the end zone, and they end up losing to Minnesota. Do you feel like that's one that Freiermuth should have had? Do you have any blame in his direction because maybe he should have had that? Or do you look at that as a bang-bang? The hit was so in there and administered a certain way that maybe it's not on him. That's right now a debate on whether that's Freiermuth dropping the ball, if he should have had it, if that's in any way on Ben, or if that's just a great defensive play.
Well, I think it's a great defensive play. Should he have had it? Probably, but that's not it's a very tough catch to make. He's coming over the middle of the field, and Harrison Smith. That's Harrison Smith. That's a 5-time Pro Bowler right there. So that's a guy who's been to all pro teams. That's Harrison Smith coming in there, one of the hardest hitters in the league for the past decade, coming in to smack you right in your ribs.
Oh, he did. Yeah.
And he did. And the thing is, I just look at the catch from a technical standpoint. I don't know what else Pat could have done. He caught the ball. He immediately tucked it into his frame, and Smith got him right in the ribs and punched the ball right out. It was a really good defensive play. Is it one that, maybe a Travis Kelce or a Darren Waller has? Yeah, but I'm not expecting Pat Freiermuth to be Travis Kelce or Darren Waller. And that's the thing. He's not that guy yet. He's still a rookie. And if Pat comes back in 2 years and he has that same play, I'm going to bet he catches that ball, because he'll learn. He'll learn.
Would you be harder on him and be more willing to say it's on him if we're talking in 2 years and he drops the same exact play at the end of a game? Is that then on him? Even if it's the same defender and it's a bulky defender and an all-pro coming at him, it still then would maybe be more on him.
I think it is still on him to a degree. He put it right in his hands, but I'm not going to get upset about him. Like, oh, he dropped it. It's like,
he didn't lose this game. No, this is a team effort loss.
I'm not going to get upset at him and say, okay, that's one that he was wide open and dropped. It wasn't an egregious drop. It's a tough catch that, yes, maybe he should have had, but that's a really, really elite, that's an elite level catch that elite tight ends do. I'm not expecting my rookie tight end to be an elite tight end. The expectations here, if in 3 years, yes, I would come back and Pat doesn't make that catch. That probably means Pat's the same player he was this year, which is okay. He's a decent tight end, but he didn't grow at all. Now I'm not going to blame him as much. He's a rookie. It is what it is. It's a very tough catch. Yes, he probably should have had it. But again, if you look at all the tight ends around the NFL who probably would have had that catch, it's a very small percentage of them. Again, the Kelce's, the Wallers, Andrews, guys like that would probably have it, but there's not many tight ends. I'd say maybe 5% of them catch that football. And that's just a tough catch to make. Yeah. So I'm not going to blame him. It was a perfect throw. It had to be a perfect catch. Yeah. It was just a better play by Harrison Smith.
It was a solid play. It was a solid play call. It was a great throw from Ben. It was also great defense from Minnesota, and they're also going to show that clip forever in every defensive camp in the world. This is why you play till the end and you hit him as hard as you can. I don't care if he hauls it in and makes an incredible catch that you think the play is over. You hustle and you lay it in there, and maybe you'll get that result. Because that could have been a monumental catch for Freiermuth that people would remember for years to come. That could set him on a path to be one of the best tight ends in the league, and I still think that potential is there. He's had a great start to his career, but instead we're looking at a great defensive play, and I think it was a great defensive play. And yeah, I do think he probably should have had it. At first, I told you before we started the show, I thought he did catch it on the first angle. Then you look at replay, it does look more and more like he should have caught it. It's fair to say that when you look at the replay, there was enough separation. He had a play on it and he had his hands on it. The defender's behind him. So unless he's hearing ghosts, you shouldn't be worrying about what's behind you. That should have been a catchable ball from Freiermuth. But to make this clear, this was a team loss. If they didn't sleep through the first half of the game, they wouldn't have to worry about Freiermuth catching at the end of the game. I don't think there's one player there that's going to be blaming Freiermuth for this loss. So yeah, he should have caught it. We have a lot of people in the chat here saying, I get everything you guys are saying about earlier in the game, but if Freiermuth would have caught it, or he dropped the pass. That just sucks if that's the takeaway from this game, really, because that just sucks because
it's a really tough catch.
It is tough, right? It's not a wide open catch.
He probably should have had it. He probably should have, but again,
he probably knows that too. I'm sure he knows
probably
that
does,
too.
But I'm telling you, I don't think many tight ends in the league hold on to that. I think there's a very small percentage that hold on to that. And, Freiermuth, again, he's a rookie. So is what it is. They should have never been in that spot. And I think that's the overwhelming takeaway. They should have never have had to rely on Pat Freiermuth to make that catch. That's the point.
Absolutely. Again, Steelers now 6-6-1. They lose to Minnesota 36-28 on Thursday Night Football. So at least we get a weekend off here from covering the Steelers and get to just watch some games, because they also need to watch some games. Maybe they're just going to unplug, but they need to worry about what other teams do to keep fighting in their playoff positioning here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now to continue our post-game show. I do want to ask you this. Obviously, the first half of this game, it's been a tale of this being an issue for this team most of the year. Offensive line has been weak. Offensive line has been bad. The gaping holes are there in the first half. Also, the Steelers defense was poor, was bad, was any other descriptive term you want to give in terms of describing god-awful play from the defense in that first half as well. And all of that led to this being too much of a hole for the Steelers to try to climb out of, even when things improved in the second half. And this team has got a little healthier defensively. They're still missing some pieces. You're missing Bugs, you're missing Joe Hayden, etc. But just fundamentals, just bad play in that first half for you. What do you have more confidence in getting better and getting good enough to allow this team to crawl in the playoffs in terms of, can the offensive line get better and be good enough? Or do you have more confidence in the defense correcting themselves and putting up a full game in which they're sound, which was not the case here because the first half just was absolutely not sound football?
Well, I've seen more consistency from the defense, at least throughout a whole game. Like, they've had performances where they have played good games. Buffalo, they played a good game against the Ravens. They played a good game against the Browns. We're
talking earlier in the season, though. It's still been a while now.
We are, but the Browns and the Ravens are at least pretty recent. The Ravens were last. I mean, the Ravens were just 4 days ago.
Yeah. The Ravens
and the Browns were on, I think, Halloween. So that was a little bit ago. But like that's legitimate good performances. So at the very least, they have the capability. And another thing, they will get TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith back, I'm assuming. I don't think either of those are too serious. So there's that too. And the thing is, I think there's more raw talent on that defense. Like, Devin Bush is way more talented than probably anyone that you would think of on the offensive side. And I think
not having Spillane as well.
Yeah, as well. And who knows? Maybe I don't expect it to happen, but who knows? Maybe late in the year we get Stephon Tuitt back finally. I don't know.
I don't know.
But I wouldn't expect it. But again, you're kind of looking at that. The offense could get better though. We have when maybe Kevin Dotson returns here soon. And they get a little bit of reinforcement on the O-line. That would be helpful, I think, to them overall. Yeah. I think the defense, though, you see halves like that second half, and you kind of saw what you saw against Baltimore, and that was without TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. So that was Taco Charlton and Derek Tuska doing that work. But they got picked up by guys like Mon Adams, for example, who I thought had a really good second half. I think the secondary is what maybe the most promising piece here, because they'll get Hayden back soon, potentially next week. And Ahkello Witherspoon is put two really good games together. Two picks for Ahkello Witherspoon today. Yeah. So, I mean, you can easily see the lineup that they'll go with, I think, in the future. And it's Hayden and Witherspoon on the outside with Sutton in the slot. So if you get a better, secondary play with potentially with Watton and Highsmith back and playing better as well, those guys combined with a healthy front potentially could with Spillane back too, could potentially create a pretty solid defense. Like, that's not completely out of the question. I don't think it's crazy. I think the offense just kind of comes and goes in spurts. It comes and goes with the offensive line. Right. It's very weird. I mean, it's a very weird offense because Ben sometimes is on and he's off. The offensive line seems to turn on with Ben. It's very, very weird. We kind of see the whole offense move as a unit here late in games, and it is what it is. But they're getting legitimate explosive plays late in the game. Like, where they got to go to the drawing board and figure out.
We saw Ben's deep ball. Yeah.
Yeah. Like why does it come out late in the games? Like, they have to go and figure out how can we get that into the entire game? Because if the offense could start to disperse some of this, streakiness that's late in the game and kind of start to actually get some consistency, they only need a drive or two in the first half, really. If they can go into the half with 7, 10, 14 points, I mean, they're in a lot better position, even if the defense craps the bed, right? Like, that's something that they just have to figure out. The offense at some point this year, the offense has to pick up the defense instead of vice versa. That just has to show up.
Yeah. And it's obviously about the offensive line as well. Ben has not been great most of the year. Certainly ends up with a solid day in this game. You can't blame Ben for this game, even though he certainly had his warts this year. But the offensive line made it just impossible to operate in that first half. Worst game of the year for me here. Nick Farabaugh, Mike Asti here on our Steelers post-game show on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now. Again, head over to Steelers Now for the game recap as well as the rest of our coverage here as well on Pittsburgh Sports Live with our video reaction. And I will go to the chat well to kind of piggyback off of Nick's comments there with the offense to a question of, do they need to give Najee Harris more touches, especially early in games? And obviously he ends up with 20 carries in this game, an average of 4.7, 90 plus yards. So again, a solid day overall. Not going to win any weeks for anyone as a fantasy owner, but a solid day overall. He's had a solid year overall numbers wise. It was a very slow start to the year for him, and he is having to pick up a very weak offensive line, which will go back to what we talked about in our draft show about the reason why maybe some thought, okay, Najee's great, but maybe you don't take Najee, you take more O-line help, because no matter who's out there, you're going to have these problems. He's had a solid year overall at this point. But do you need to go to him earlier and more often? And maybe while your offense is trying to figure things out in the passing game, because it clearly takes a half to do so, you can maybe go to Najee more, because it seems like they're hesitant to go to him too much when he is a rookie, he is young, and if he's having a decent outing, I don't know if there's anything else as consistent in this game.
Well, they were terrible run blocking in the first half. I don't know what they would have done with more Najee.
Yeah.
Like, they actually went to him too much in the second half. That sequence where they just ran the ball 3 times, got to delay a game, and proceed to punt the football was an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
If you need more Najee, it's got to be through the air. And I think that's some way.
That's part of it, though. He did have 14 targets in the game earlier this season.
Yes, he did. And I think they finally started to rekindle that a little bit in the second half. And they haven't really done it since that 14 target game. Like, very, very, they very infrequently have they put him out wide and actually gotten him on developing routes. Like, that is something with Najee we need, I think, to see a little bit more of. I think they need to get him in the passing game more. In the rushing game, though, if they're not, I mean, if they're running the ball, of course they do, but they were running the ball terribly this first half. Nothing was working. The offensive line was terrible on all fronts. So I don't think giving the ball to Najee on the ground is going to change much in that regard. It can, though, as they start to maybe get something going. I think the passing game is where you just have to see Najee maybe get a little bit more involved, because, again, he can be that other target that maybe takes some pressure off Deontay, off Claypool. That can be that guy. And when teams have to just allocate resources to Najee Harris out of the backfield because he is such a good receiver, that's when you can get better. The question is, how do you do that? And I think the thing that the Steelers try to do, I think, is a little too much, is they try to replicate what worked last game. And then it just doesn't work because teams are going to make adjustments.
Yeah. So every opponent's different. It's a different game. Right.
Yeah. And so early on, they tried a ton of the play action stuff that they did against the Ravens, and it just didn't work. Like, they were prepared for it. They watched that Ravens game, and even on a short week, the Vikings said, okay, this is what's going to work against their play action game, and we're going to do this. And well, they did that. And I think, Canada, I think, is just Canada takes the entire half to get adjusted, and then they come back out in the second half with a new game plan, and then they dice it up. And I think Matt Canada, I think that this is maybe where you can blame Canada and Ben a little bit, just game playing throughout the week. Like, yes, take elements from what worked the previous week, but also mesh new ones in there and kind of see, okay, this is what their weaknesses are. This is what we can do while maybe maintaining some of the things that worked last week. See if we can maintain those. But you don't just want to go with a copy paste and boom, here, this is this. And then you have to a slow start as a result. And I think that's part of it, outside of just the awful play from the O-line. I think that they tried a lot of the things that worked against the Ravens, when obviously the Vikings are a different defense and obviously work very differently than Baltimore does.
I think it's very fair to say that nothing was going to be able to be successful with as bad as the offensive line was playing in that first half. Lord, the offensive line was bad in that first half. And this Vikings team very differently built than the Ravens. And after that Ravens game, even with the defense putting 7 sacks on the board there against Lamar Jackson, I argued, some could argue at the end of that game, we'll really see what the defense is, because Lamar holds on to the ball forever. He's going to try to scramble. That can create sacks. Kirk Cousins, a different quarterback. He's a pocket passer. He's got quicker release, and he certainly will make mistakes and throw bad picks that we saw at the end of games. different quarterback. So you saw that, and it led to less of a pass rush, less sacks, and certainly a struggling first half that eventually turned it on. Cousins tried to make the mistake still and give him the game, but it didn't end up happening because they dug themselves into such a hole in that first half. The Vikings do win this. So that trap game after the Ravens game, or whatever you want to call it, ends up being a loss for the Steelers. A short week, players still hurt, but no excuses are there. Just fundamental football wasn't there in that first half, and it's inexcusable. And everyone deserves some blame. And yeah, it does seem like there's some second half adjustments that occur with this Steelers team, but you got to put it into a full game or it just doesn't matter. Steelers now 6-6-1. Nick Farabaugh, Mike Asti here. And Nick, that will now segue into next week. The Steelers go back to the AFC. They now play the Tennessee Titans, who were a team that certainly had high expectations entering this season. They dealt with some injuries, most notably to their top flight player in terms of Derrick Henry, but they are still fighting for their playoff lives. They still certainly believe they have something in front of them. They're not going to be an easy team to play by any means. Yes, they'll be back in Pittsburgh, and the Steelers now will have some rest going into that game, maybe get Hayden back, maybe get healthier, whereas they were off a short week this week from just 4 days ago against Baltimore. What are the keys to the matchup against Tennessee? A totally different opponent, a different scheme, a different game. Copy and paste not going to work in that one, like it never will work. But what do you expect from the matchup against Tennessee, which is a must win, as they all now are, really?
Well, it's a very winnable game for, I think, the Steelers. I think it's a very winnable game because, as you mentioned, no Derrick Henry, but also A.J. Brown's on IR. Julio's still on IR. Obviously, he was activated to return, so I'm assuming Julio will play on the 19th. But that's just one guy they'll have back. They also Bud Dupree's on IR, so we don't know if he'll play and he'll have his little reunion to Pittsburgh. They're hurt right now, and Tannehill's not playing well, and that's the big thing. The running game for them is completely dead. And you don't want to be the get right game if you're Pittsburgh. That's the last thing you need. But I'll say this. There's a few things. One, I'm assuming Julio Jones is going to be back. Don't let him take over the game. He's literally the only thing on offense you have to worry about. Just about. I don't think anyone's worried about Jeremy McNichols and Chester Rogers. Just saying. So, you got to key in on him. Defensively, the Titans are prone to getting beat deep and for explosive plays. So there's ability for the Steelers to push the ball down the field like they have the past few weeks and get big plays. There's things for the Steelers that they can exploit on this Titans defense. Like they can get those deep balls. They can get Najee going underneath. I think the Titans actually allow the most receiving yards to running backs this year. So as we talked about, get Najee Harris involved. Like that makes more sense, but get him involved in the passing game outside of just the rushing game. So they just got to come out, more importantly, play good fundamental football, start out strong, because listen, they had a bad first half offensively against the Ravens too, but the defense played really well fundamental football, and they kept them in the game. Now, it can be the opposite next week. I don't know. Maybe the defense plays like trash again, but the offense, if they come out, play good fundamental football, and they score 14 and it's 21-14 at the half, no one's going to care as long as the defense can fix it in the second half and they can win a game. They don't have to score 4 touchdowns to win the game. Like, that's the difference. I mean, the Steelers just can't get into 29-0 holes, 31-3 holes, 24-0 holes that they've been in this year. That's the thing. And it'll be interesting to see because, again, I think the Steelers, this is a winnable game for Pittsburgh. I think Tennessee, while they're 8-4, they're a team that's reeling. They're a team that's missing a lot of their top guns. Their quarterback isn't playing particularly that well. So it's a winnable game for the Steelers. And I will say this. I know when Mike Tomlin has his back against the wall and his teams have their backs against the wall, they come out and usually play a really good football game. So I don't know. This one feels like one that could shape up for a Steelers bounce back. They're coming off a loss, a heartbreaking one in Minnesota, but they'll have the 10 days rest. Hopefully they'll have Watt and those guys, but you never know. But again, it looks like a game they could win. Again, I'm not going to predict the win or anything, but it's a game that if they play decently enough, they play like that against the Ravens, for example, I think they'll win this game. Because they're going to have tough games coming up. I mean, it's Titans, Chiefs, Browns, Ravens. That's tough. And to get into the playoffs, you're gonna have to win 3 of those last 4, I think. And you're gonna have
I would say you got to win 3 of those 4, and I would say this Tennessee game was a must-win game. now late in the year, certainly for your mojo, even if you win the next 3 in a row, you got to win this game. It's a winnable game, certainly a matchup you can win, but it wouldn't shock me at all. This is the Steelers roller coaster ride this year. This is the chronic that Steeler fans and media are going to have to be sipping on this year. They have a big win over the Ravens. They get away from having their backs against the wall. They feel like they overcame when their backs were against the wall and the hurdles of having several weeks in a row of either losing or tying the Lions, for crying out loud. And then they go ahead 4 days later and have a miserable first half without fundamentals and just play god-awful offensive line-wise, offensive-wise, and defensively in the first half of this national TV game against Minnesota, who's a team very similar to them that they certainly were able to beat. People looked at this game as a winnable game, and they didn't show up in that first half. And then they could have go ahead and beat Tennessee, but then it's Kansas City on the road. They're playing better now. They're winning some games now. They have a lot to play for as well. That's not going to be easy by any means. Tough place to play. Go ahead and lose that game, and then it's just back and forth, following, how this team has been all year. So
I'll say this. Certainly seems like they're destined for 8-1, and Tomlin's 15th winning season will be clinched. I think. I honestly, if I had a prediction right now, I would predict them to split these last 4 games and go to 8-1. That would be my prediction.
Yeah. Well, 8-1 would be 500. It wouldn't be a winning season, but it would be avoiding
a losing season.
It would not be a losing season. You're right. Yeah. Tomlin would still not have a losing season. And again, it would put them right in the middle of the NFL draft, right maybe in a conversation about Kenny Pickett. And we'll see then, because no matter what, this is going to be one hell of an offseason in terms of Ben retiring, who they're going to pick, what they're going to have to do. Penny Pickett name will be brought up all the time. And this team likely will be ending a mediocre season and needing to rebuild and fix everything and having a lot more than just the quarterback position to be looking for as well. But the Steelers now need to focus on the here and now, and the here and now is on to Tennessee back at home at Heinz Field in a must-win game, a winnable game. But you know what? They're all winnable and they're all freaking losable as well for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. That's one thing we've definitely learned. The Steelers sleep through the first half. God awful in the first half. They dig themselves into a hole. They try to climb out of it. And once again, they can't get themselves out of it in the second half. The Steelers lose to Minnesota on Thursday Night Football, 36-28. The Steelers now 6-1. That'll do it for this edition of our post-game show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now. We will have the complete coverage back at home next Sunday. So the Steelers and us, we get, a weekend off and kind of get some time off to regroup after another bad performance by the Steelers as the roller coaster ride